Let's take a closer look at this exchange deal. Roughly 2,000 Palestinian prisoners are set to be released in exchange for the 48 Israeli captives, among them 1,700 Palestinians from Gaza. The UN considers them forcibly disappeared. Another 250 Palestinians have been serving life and long sentences, mostly for attacks or alleged involvement in violence against Israelis. 135 of them will be deported to Gaza or exiled abroad. 100 are expected to be sent to the occupied West Bank, and 15 are set to be released in East Jerusalem. Now, ahead of the exchange, prisoners have been transported to Ofer prison near Ramallah and Ketziot prison in the Negev desert. Let's get over now, and joining us live is from Montreal is Mouin Rabbani. He's a non-resident fellow with the Center for Conflict and Humanitarian Studies. Mouin, thank you so much for joining us. We have to look at the wider picture here. This is just the beginning, perhaps, of a process where we see Israel withdraw. What are you looking at the pitfalls and the bottlenecks in this ceasefire deal?
Well, the first question is whether this is the beginning or the end. Some people have suggested that once Israel retrieves its captives, it will simply resume its genocidal military offensive in the Gaza Strip. Others have suggested that Israel will wait until negotiations collapse over the second stage of the Trump-Netanyahu proposal over issues like governance and disarmament. But looked at more broadly, it's, I think, equally plausible to suggest that this agreement will hold and, in some respects, will mimic the ceasefire agreement in Lebanon, where the Palestinians cease fire and Israel continues to fire. And at the same time, Israel may be quite content to see negotiations over governance and disarmament and so on collapse, because it could then use these as a pretext to maintain its forces inside the Gaza Strip to prevent reconstruction and so on. So I think what will happen after today is very much up in the air, and it's really unclear what will happen the minute Trump's flight leaves back to Washington.
Ultimately, Mouin, though, you look at all this and you realize that it's also going to be contingent on how Mr. Trump's resolve is.
Well, that's the main problem. I mean, we saw already in January that Trump was very determined to get an Israeli-Palestinian agreement. But really the only thing he was interested in was to have a diplomatic achievement on the day of his inauguration. And thereafter, the interest waned, and Israel was able to successfully manipulate the situation and resume and even intensify the Gaza genocide with the full-throated support of Washington. People have suggested that this time it's different because particularly after the Israeli bombing of the Qatari capital, Doha, the Arab leaders realize now that their own sovereignty and national security hangs in the balance, and that they therefore impressed upon Trump the need to seriously address this issue. But again, Washington's attention span is everything in this issue, because the decisions are ultimately going to be made not by Israel, not by the Palestinians, not by the Arab states, but by the United States. And we've seen in the past that when it comes to turf wars, if you will, in Washington, Israel usually comes out on top.
To really also look at Benjamin Netanyahu here, there's a lot of pressure on him. And, you know, of course, Donald Trump, you could argue, has sort of, I suppose, twisted his arm to get this done. And, you know, that's the resolve part of it. But let's face it, the whole world, it seems, at the moment has turned against the country, his country, and against him in particular.
On the one hand, that's true. I mean, if you're talking about sentiment, and certainly when you're talking about global public opinion, including public opinion in the West. But the key issue is not what people think, but what governments do. And so far, we have seen Western governments very unresponsive to the wishes and demands of their own public, refusing to take meaningful, concrete actions like Britain ending intelligence overflights over the Gaza Strip, like states imposing an arms embargo on Israel, or refusing access to their markets for illegal settlements rather illegal products from illegal settlements. And it is really only when we begin to see these kinds of actions that they can have a meaningful impact on Israeli conduct and Israeli policy. So yes, Netanyahu is a fugitive from international justice, but he's still permitted to use the airspace of a number of states that are signatories to the Rome Treaty and that are members of the International Criminal Court.
Absolutely. And then, of course, there's the bigger picture. Who's going to rebuild what Israel has bombed?
Well, I think the consensus among Western governments seems to be everyone but the people who reduced the Gaza Strip to rubble. I haven't really seen a single demand that Israel participate in any way for rebuilding what it has destroyed. And the United States seems determined to let Arab states foot the bill, to place it at their feet. And their position is that they are, in principle, prepared to participate in reconstruction and to participate in what's called the stabilization force in the Gaza Strip, but they have to do so in the context of a broader political plan that includes credible and irreversible progress towards an end to occupation and the establishment of an independent Palestinian state, not in the Gaza Strip, but in the territories Israel occupied in 1967. And the key question now is, Washington is also divided. There are different factions in Washington. Israel firsters, non-interventionists, Christian Zionists, and so on. So you have all these separate struggles going on in different parts of the region and in the West. And so far, it's very unclear who in the end is going to come out on top, particularly with a U.S. leader who is so fickle and erratic and unpredictable. And it is precisely in such conditions that Israel has consistently proven itself able to win those kinds of turf wars. So there's absolutely no reason to be optimistic about what's next. There's actually not even reason to be fully confident that this agreement will not be dismantled and its collapse won't be engineered by Israel in the short term. So very much depends on how the various parties stand on their position and ensure that there is no further backsliding allowed, as appears to have already happened with respect to the details of this exchange of captives that's now taking place.
Yeah, and on top of this, Mouin, is the recognition in this ceasefire deal of the Palestinians' aspirations for statehood without actually having any roadmap to get there, and anything which is actually put on paper has many preconditions anyway.
Well, I would go even further. That particular clause of the Trump-Netanyahu proposal does not recognize any Palestinian right to either self-determination or statehood. It simply takes note that Palestinians have this aspiration. So, if you compare that proposal to, for example, the international consensus, international law, the rights of the Palestinians as repeatedly defined by international bodies such as the United Nations, they're fully and fundamentally incompatible. And I think what's also important to realize now is you have two separate dynamics. On the one hand, you have this agreement, which is embedded in a process which is very much modeled on Oslo, but with a much lower political ceiling, in which Palestinians are going to get sucked into these interminable negotiations about minor details that ultimately lead to nothing. At the same time, you have this alternative global dynamic in which even some governments are already participating, which is to remove the impunity Israel has so consistently enjoyed, to replace it with accountability and consequences. And these two dynamics are now very much in competition. And I think it has been the popular mobilization that we've seen around the world, including even now, after this agreement has been signed, that should be seen as a sign of hope, because people are not packing up and going home just because there has been a pause and maybe an end to the hostilities that have produced the Gaza genocide. They realize that there is still a very substantial to-do list, and that only continued pressure on governments to do the right thing is going to bear any results.
Mouin Rabbani, thank you so much for joining us. Mouin Rabbani is a non-resident fellow with the Centre for Conflict and Humanitarian Studies.
Don't miss out. Get the full picture. Subscribe to Al Jazeera for reliable news, expert insight. Like, share, stay ahead.